everybody. If you come on in, we'll begin our class this morning. I think Caleb is dragging the bottom of the bowl. He called me Friday, and he's not going to be here today, so he asked me to fill in for him. And that's kind of a last-minute thing, so we do the best we can. I did find some scriptures and some lesson. Today we're going to be talking about friendship. He asked me not to continue in Colossians. Number one, I haven't been in the class, and number two, I think he's still apparently on the introduction to Colossians from what I understand. So he wanted to try to finish that up before he began. Just as an aside, I think in March I've been asked to teach, and we're going to teach, or I'm assuming that I'll be here in the auditorium class. I've always hated the auditorium trying to teach in a class. It's the environment is not what I enjoy. Everybody's spread out. It's big. It echoes. But we're going to do the best that we can on that. And just to give you a heads up, I had taught a class several years ago and thought that we were going to rotate teaching so that everybody would have the same thing. So I'm modifying what I did a couple of years ago, and that's going to be on the life of Christ. It'll be, usually significantly different than what we usually think of, trying to emphasize some things that I think Christ pointed out in his ministry and some things I think that we can learn. So I'm in the process of kind of modifying and preparing for that. That'll be 1st of March, I believe, when our quarter starts. So just giving you a heads up so you can try to find another class if you are so inclined. So today, most of our lesson is going to be taken from, all of it, going to be taken from the book of Proverbs. What got me thinking about this was several of us were here Thursday night, and Joey's outreach ministry that he's encouraging people to become a part of, I was here, and I got really thinking about that afterwards when it was dealing with the purpose and what he explained the purpose of that was. And that's not only an outreach program, but it's certainly an in-reach program too. And when he talked about relationships, and friendship is one of the paramount themes that Jesus actually talked about. What was the number one commandment when he asked this? Found in Deuteronomy and also in the scriptures, Matthew and I believe Luke also. What was one of the commandments that we as Christians are to adhere to? Okay, that was the number 2, right? So if that occurred in the Old Testament and also occurs in the New Testament, the relationship that we have with other people is important. And I think all of us would agree with that. So the scriptures that we've chosen this morning are dealing with friendship, relationship with other people. The story on this, I think, if you're old enough and young enough too, you remember Charlie Brown, right? I've always been struck by the 5-cent advice that Lucy always gives. It's real unfortunate because newspapers are almost a thing of the past now. Still take one, but for years, this cartoon just on a regular basis had Lucy, and poor Charlie Brown seemed to be the only one who ever sought advice, and you get what you pay for. So this one I thought was was really good, and I didn't make this up. It was part of the lesson. Here it is. It says, in one of Charles Schulz's comic strips, good old Charlie Brown pays one of his frequent visit to Lucy's 5-cent sidewalk. There was a psychiatric stand. With a look of complete dejection on his face, Charlie says to his would-be counselor, I can't help it. I feel lonely and depressed. You can see his forlorn look if you were a reader of the comic strip. Lucy immediately jumps to the occasion with some needed encouragement for Charlie. This is ridiculous, she insists. You should be ashamed of yourself, Charlie Brown. You've got the whole world to live in, she continues. There's beauty all around you. There are things to do, great things to be accomplished. No man treads the earth alone. We're all together. One generation taking up where the other generation has left off. Slowly a smile spreads across Charlie's face as Lucy's words begin to sink in. You're right, Lucy. You're right. You've made me see things differently. I realize that I am part of the world. I am not alone. I have friends. Lucy quickly replies, name one. Lucy has a way of applying the dagger pretty quickly. I can see Charlie. So, as we mentioned before, everybody needs friends. It's the second most basic relationship in life. Proverb clearly tells us what makes a good friend and how to develop and maintain meaningful friendships. If I had to ask you, and please do participate because it's key. What would you say the number one aspect or characteristic of a good friend would be?
Consistency.
Consistency. Okay.
Trustworthiness.
What?
Trustworthiness.
Trustworthiness. Okay. Anything else?
Caring.
Pardon?
Caring.
Caring. I'm deaf. You got to really shout. Sorry.
Availability.
All right. Being available.
One that won't borrow money from you.
Borrow money. Okay. So I think we've got a pretty good idea of it. So let's see if we can look and y'all help me out with the reading. Proverbs 17:17. And then somebody else look up Proverbs 27:10. All of these are in Proverbs, as I said. So same book. And when somebody gets to 17:17, just go ahead and read it. Okay? And 27:10.
Your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away.
That's kind of striking, isn't it? That Proverbs tells us, what about friendship? Who is a better to depend on for a friend? Family or neighbors? According to this, it's better to have a good neighbor friend than it is family friend. Can you relate to that? You got family, most of us can't we? You know, there tends to be, because we're so similar in many ways, there tends to be, sometimes an aspect that can get us in trouble if we're not careful. A lot of families have divisions that we're not comfortable with, but in reality, that's the way that it is. So, faithfulness is a big aspect of friendship. Can you think of a, James?
That it equates friend and neighbor kind of in the same context. And I think, most of my friends are not my neighbors. I know my neighbors, but the same thing, and that's why I said availability earlier.
Virtual friendship takes on a completely different meaning. Yeah, I agree with that. Fully, it's great while you're online, but once you're offline, then what happens? I saw a news feed that came in, and just the last little bit, which I did not read, but was talking about middle-aged women and their connection online and the friendships apparently that are developed, but the primary issue is loneliness. When all is said and done, you can't have a world that's so virtual that we give up the attributes that is so important to us. And I think Christianity certainly conveys that message to us, very, very, very much so. There's so many scriptures that Jesus talks about our connection with our neighbors and with our friends that are important. Can you think of, and I'm fishing, can you think of a specific relationship in the Old Testament that involved this very situation that we're talking about of family versus friends and the friendship that was connected there? And again, I realize I'm fishing. I just want to see if you connect. David and Jonathan is exactly right. Jonathan was the son of Saul, not related to David, but their friendship was great. So much so that what did Saul try to do to his son? Pretty drastic. Tried to kill him. Threw a spear at him. And the fear, or not the fear, but the anger that Saul had was because of Jonathan's relationship with David. So, there are some scriptures and some episodes in the Old Testament primarily that talks about this connection and how important that it is. What makes a good friend? Keeping confidences. I think we heard that mentioned. Friends do not gossip. Whew, that's a tough one. What aspects of gossip can you think of that would be a problem with friendship? James?
No, not to answer that question, but kind of in a similar vein as we were talking about. As we were talking about the quality of a good friend, I think your own quality when you have a good friend is vulnerability. And it ties in with gossip because, a friend is someone you can share things with. Not just experiences, but your dreams and aspirations and football and all those things. And so there is a vulnerability. And Michelle said, trustworthiness, but the flip side of that is trust, your personal trust that you have in that. So obviously gossip can be very corrosive to any relationship, but especially with close friendship. You gotta like your family, or your family and friends. That's a different level of vulnerability, I think.
And I think it's pretty obvious to most of us that when we talk to somebody else about a personal relationship or whatever, or knowledge that we have with a friend, there's an inherent danger in doing that. Because primarily, are we part of the solution when it involves somebody else? And the answer, I think, in almost all cases is no. It's not really an issue that involves us, gossip, I mean, and it's certainly not an issue that the gossip aspect will help to alleviate. We're not going to resolve anything. Doesn't mean we can't get involved with it, I suppose, but from a simple talking to others about it. Somebody look up Proverbs 16:28. And somebody else, Proverbs 11:13. Proverbs 16:28 and Proverbs 11:13. Proverbs 16:28, and this is NIV, says, "A perverse man stirs up dissension, and a gossip separates close friends." That's what we're talking about. What's perverse mean? We hear it used, but we don't use it a whole lot in conversation. What does it mean? It can mean two different things. A corrupt person, obviously not something that's good. But what's another definition of perverse?
King James Version says froward.
Says what?
Froward.
Froward. Well, I'd have to look that up too.
Froward.
But I think if I remember right, it's of a similar nature to exactly what we're talking about. Perverse can also mean incorrect. We can think of it in a law sense where a judge makes a decision that's perverse or incorrect, or a lot of other opportunities. So an inherent danger in gossip is what? That the information that's being relayed to somebody else can be incorrect. Not necessarily a corrupt person, but simply an incorrect person, which leads to more and more problems. Proverbs 11:13. A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy man keeps a secret. Something that we can always relate to. This one was one that I typically, makes a lot of sense, but I wouldn't have just picked it out right off of the bat. I don't think any of us did that when we do. Kindness. Do you think of a friend of being kind? It's almost like that's an inherent part of friendship, but, not necessarily one that we associate with sometimes. Proverbs 26:18 and 19. And somebody read that for us. A different aspect of kindness. Who's got that?
Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, "I am only joking."
Have you ever read that verse before? We do. We don't think much about it sometimes. What's the gist of this sentence in Proverbs? A man throws deadly. Do what?
But the damage was done, like, he's trying to play something off, in this case, something deadly. And he's just, thinking it'll all be okay, he can just, not feel bad about it because, oh, it's only joking. But in the meantime, the guy was probably hurt or killed, so it doesn't matter, the outcome was awful.
We usually don't think of friendship and kindness along this same vein, do we? I think it's very common for us to carry a joke too far. And the end results are often detrimental to the relationship because feelings are hurt physically, mentally, emotionally. And the statement here says, and I've never thought about this, fathers can help their children by teaching them the difference between a joke or harmless prank and going too far. Men, fathers, have you ever thought about this aspect in dealing with your kids, that we are to be an example to them of explaining it? Everybody enjoys a good time, enjoys a joke. I love to joke. Cynical as all get out, but I do enjoy a joke. But we have to be careful that we don't carry it too far. And I've truthfully never really thought of this characteristic of a friendship is involving excessive pranking or joking. Paul says, number 4, do not co-sign for each other. Friends encourage each other to live within their means. Is that difficult? Extremely. Yeah. Most of us have been in that situation, haven't we? That either family or friends or somebody, needs something to tide me over until when? Payday. Usually payday is a long time in the future, isn't it, if ever? What happens to put a strain on friendship when it involves money? James?
I've known of some individuals in my extended family where brothers have stopped talking to each other for decades because of some kind of money thing. And that's just tragic.
It is tragic. It's tragic. And I think you understand this whole aspect, while it's easy to pick out family and friends, this is a church issue too, and we're family. And so, we owe it, in all honesty, to each other to encourage our brothers and sisters to be responsible and to live within our means. I think that is a great aspect of unity within a congregation. And again, this reflects back on our honesty and our relationship that we have with each other. Somebody find Proverbs 6, verses 1 through 5. And somebody else, Proverbs 17, 18. Who's got the first one? 6, 1 through 5.
My son, you have put up security for your neighbor, have given your place
For a stranger, if you are snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself. For you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go, hasten, and plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep, and your eyelids no slumber. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Wow.
What did Solomon say that we should do if we are, as he says, trapped? We have put up security for somebody else. Does he say that we are to wait to see if we're going to get paid back or not? Not necessarily. He says, do our very best to get out of the situation on it. James? Yeah. So better not to do it at all, but if you do find yourself in that situation, then we try to get free from that. Pretty significant. Proverbs 17:18 says, a man lacking in judgment strikes hands in pledge and puts up security for his neighbor. So we are aware of pledging money. That's basically signing for somebody else in our vernacular for today, where we pledge that we're going to be responsible for a debt or a co-debt. And he says that by doing that, we're lacking in judgment when we do. How many of you have ever gone to Proverbs when you're faced with this situation and explained to somebody about what the Bible has to say about going into debt with somebody or pledging securities for somebody? It's typically not something that we usually think of as being a biblical principle that's there in clear, understandable writing. And again, I think we can see the implications of that, and they're not good. it has a statement down here which I think, from my experience, has been very, very true. Friendship involves caring for somebody. It involves generosity for other people. So what's the best approach? If we have somebody that we see and we want to help them, or we would not be willing to sign for them. Would you agree with that? So if the Bible tells us that this is not the best approach, one to be avoided, what should we do? I know I'm not going to come to y'all looking for money, because I'm going to get a stony face when I do so. So what would be the best approach for this?
You know, we've been talking about kindness as an aspect of friendship, but sometimes kindness is the idea of tough love, and part of that applies to the idea of pledging security, co-signing, counter. But a true friend is someone that will tell you when you're messing up, that will do it gently and with love and humility, but sometimes kindness is a bitter pill, especially when you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. And your willingness to rebuke a friend is a reflection of your love for that friend, I think.
And that's actually coming down the road in some of the discussion here. So, Paul?
I think a good attribute of a friend would be someone that can give you good advice in these instances. Sometimes we don't want to hurt somebody, but sometimes hurting them by saying no is better than helping them by saying yes. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So, even though they may not like you saying no, when you actually are helping them by saying no.
What's the alternative? No is hard to say, but I mean, it is something. And it can be good advice, turning people down. But again, we really haven't answered the question that I asked. If somebody comes, Larry, I need $20 for a couple of weeks. What are the options that we have? Saying no, I mean, that's pretty obvious. We've discussed that. What's the other option?
Plan on just giving it when, just not expecting payment back.
I think that's a much more realistic issue, that if you want to maintain a friendship with somebody, you give it to them. If you can afford it and want to try to help somebody out, you give them the money, or you give them whatever the case might be, without the expectations, are you going to receive anything in return. What does that do for me? Sorry, Larry, you're the one needed the 20, and I've given you $20. What does that say? What feelings do I have in that situation? Positive or negative? Very positive. It's exactly an aspect of friendship that we overlook sometimes, is the feelings that we receive by doing something for somebody else with no strings attached.
In a positive way.
In a positive way. In a positive way.
Well, some friends.
Some friends will, yeah. I tell you, from a business aspect, from all the years that I was in business, sometimes you have an opportunity to do something for somebody else. It has amazed me over the times that might be years down the road that they will come back and they say, I will never forget the kindness that you showed. And it doesn't always involve money. A lot of times it will involve time or inconvenience or some aspect of things that we don't think anything about. But the impact that we have on other people and involving our friendship to them is great.
Well, even the Lord teaches us about interest, you know, and our gifts that we given. If we use them wisely, then, you know, we give back to the Lord interest. If we use them unwisely, we're not doing the right thing. So, even if you do loan someone some money and charge them interest, you're teaching them to be responsible.
And yet the Bible has clear implications and clear provisions, at least as far as the Jews were concerned, as far as borrowing money was concerned. Larry, you were going to say something?
You like me in your profession, you know, sometimes you do things and they say they're gonna do this and you say, okay, in your mind, you know, I'm not gonna, you know, just give it to them. But then sometimes you're surprised, they come back and do what they said. I mean, it makes you feel good, I reckon, in your relationship to them, that they did what they said, they really meant it.
And that does happen. Although from my experience, not very often. But that's you know, that's a whole different aspect. I guess if I were being honest with myself, there was a string attached to the generosity or whatever that was conveyed. Let's move on and see if we can clear these. We only have a few minutes. Somebody look up. This is dealing with forgiveness. Friends do not seek revenge. Ties into really to a lot of what we've been saying. Proverbs 24, verse 29 says, "Do not say, I'll do to him as he has done to me. I'll pay that man back for what he did." Now that's straight out of Proverbs. Retribution for a wrong that has been done to us. Proverbs 20:20 says, "Do not say, I'll pay you back for this wrong. Wait for the Lord, and he will deliver you." And you know, the Jews had a whole different aspect of revenge. That's why in Matthew, Jesus says, "You say an eye for an eye." This was a Jewish aspect. It tells them not to do it in Proverbs, and it's certainly reiterated in the New Testament. And yet we know that it goes on. Forgiveness can be, well, you tell me, what aspects of forgiveness are difficult? Is it difficult to forgive? Do we often pay lip service to forgiveness? I think so. I think, again, that's an aspect as Christians which we often pay lip service to, but when it comes right down to it, it's very difficult to forgive and to forget. Isn't that what is great about forgiveness from God's standpoint? You know, that and what separates humanity from godliness, one of the many things, obviously, but when God says, "I'm going to wipe it out," what a tremendous aspect of God that we, you know, I don't think we overlook it, but we don't pay it the respect that we need to do many times. So this aspect of forgiveness is big.
Would you be willing to do it again for that person?
Over and over. Jesus said what? How many times? 70 times 7, or some versions say 77 times 7. That's a lot of forgiveness, and his point was not being specific. It's to be done on a continual basis. Something that's very, very difficult. Yes?
Discussion. I also like Proverbs 17:9. It says, "Love prospers when an offense is forgiven." This ties forgiveness with what we talked about earlier. Love prospers when an offense is forgiven, but sharing it with others separates close friends.
contrast between the gossiping about your relationship versus the forgiveness and debt. And it's kind of like lending money. That friend will remember that they've been forgiven, especially if it's something significant.
What does forgiving do for us if we're the one that's doing the forgiving? What are we able to do? Move on. And that's something that's not easy to do, but it frees us by being able to move on, to have that peace of mind, not to bog it down. The world is full of problems, and we don't need one more.
It's not just,
It also lightens the load of the other person that
Yes.
has been forgiven.
there's not just spiritual value in forgiveness, but there's actual psychological and physiological value in forgiveness. If you dwell on something, it increases your stress, increases anxiety, increases your anger, increases your blood pressure. You know, all these things are negative outcomes. But if you can, forgive the individual, let them know they're forgiven, which is an important component of forgiveness, and then move on. You're just going to be a happier person.
Will. Think of old Lucy. She had adequate opportunity, didn't she, to encourage Charlie Brown. That's what I love about Peanuts, is those characteristics that are juvenile in nature are really obviously intended for adult relationships. And oftentimes, we don't forgive somebody to their knowledge. They don't know about it. So y'all are absolutely right. The last one that we'll cover asks the question, what makes a good friend? Telling the truth, something that we talked about earlier, even if it is bad news. Friends do not hold the truth in order to save the other person's feelings. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. The importance of truth in our relationship. Proverbs 27:6 says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. What does that mean?
You know, oh, they hate you.
If we are truly friends with somebody and we share something with them that they may not necessarily like, how do we take it as a friend? If it's delivered in the right way, usually it can be a constructive discussion, something that builds up a relationship versus tearing it down. Why do he says, iron sharpens iron. When you sharpen a knife, what do you use? Some kind of a pumice stone, which actually removes some of the material, and yet what is the end result? A sharper knife. Yep. It's more useful. The pleasantness in Proverbs 27:9, the pleasantness of one's friends springs from his earnest counsel, which is, again, what we do. All right, this is, I think, perhaps the most interesting, so dwell on it. What makes a good friend? Unselfishness. Friends look out for the interest of others. I think we all can understand that aspect of it, but it's not necessarily easy to do. Let me ask you this question here. When you're looking for a friend, what quality is the most important to you?
I think, Joel, one thing that we didn't talk about initially was godliness. If you're a Christian, I think a very important aspect of friendship is finding someone who shares your same values and beliefs and your same code of conduct. Not to say you can't have friends that are not Christians, but assuming some risk when you do that, I think.
From a Christian standpoint, I think you're exactly right. And even from a secular sense in the world, that's true too. People, as they say, birds of a feather tend to do what? Flock together. So, you know, if you're seeking worldly things, you're going to seek out worldly people to do it with. And if we're looking for Christian aspects in individuals, then obviously the most logical place would be with fellow Christians, wouldn't it? And Jesus himself said we can't mix them. You know, we can't participate in one and participate in the other without a great sense of guilt involved, I would say. Which quality of a friend from Proverbs do you tend to overlook? Now, some of this we haven't really touched on that much. How about this scenario? If you saw one of your friends engaging in destructive behavior, what would you do? If you needed to tell somebody else, maybe they were breaking the law, maybe they were cheating on a spouse, as a friend, what would you do? Realizing that if you conveyed this information, detrimental conduct that your friend was engaged with, knowing that that's going to strain or destroy your friendship, what's the proper action? It's a tough one. Okay?
And then go to everybody else and talk to everybody else about it, or, you know, that's the, easier way, and go to them and tell them what they're doing wrong.
Okay? And that's the most honest way of trying to, you know, maintain a friendship and yet trying to help the other person too. Any other thoughts? Well, we lacked about 5 minutes of being able to finish things up, but thank you for your participation this morning. I appreciate it.